Hello there. Welcome to our How to Kickstart Your AI Journey webinar. Thanks for joining today. We'll start with just a few introductions. So I'm Ollie Bartlett. I'm going to be hosting the webinar today. I'm a product manager at Datasparq. We also have my colleague Darren on the line, who's going to be doing a bit of an interview later with Andy. And yeah, a huge thanks to Andy Carr from The Big Word, who's going to join us and share a bit more about their experience with this process. Guys, you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone.
Hi, guys.
Brilliant. Great. So at Datasparq, we deliver and run AI and machine learning solutions to solve business problems. And when we start to work with most of our clients, they've had little or no experience with AI. So over the past year or so, we've developed an approach to helping businesses get started. And that's what we'll be sharing today. By the end of the webinar, our goal is that you understand our three-step approach to getting started with AI, that you're able to use our downloadable assets to help you along the way, and that you'll be clear on the first step you can take tomorrow to get started. As we go through, if you've got any questions, just click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window, type it in at the end of the webinar. I'll answer as many of those as we have time for. I'm going to start with a bit of a poll, so we can just get a bit of understanding of where everyone is on this journey. So you should see this pop up in your Zoom window. So I'll just give you a few seconds to answer that. Great, thank you. Okay, so looks like there's kind of a mix of people from the start to having tried it and actually failed before or just starting out. I think if you're just starting out for the first time, this webinar is going to give you some tools and techniques to help you take those first steps. If you're starting again, having maybe not had the success you wanted the first time, hopefully there'll be some tips here that will allow you to approach your next project differently. Set some context. This webinar will be talking through the first phase of how we deliver an AI project. We call this Prime. We typically cover everything in this phase in our half-day Spark shop, which is a workshop we run with clients at the start of an engagement. Following the steps we'll talk about today, we would move into a prove phase where we would prototype solutions to test our assumptions and prove the benefits of the solution before we go into productionizing it. And this first phase, this prove phase, has these three steps. We identify a high value problem as the first step. The second step is we qualify AI as a solution. And the third step is about validating the feasibility of the solution. And these three steps are what we cover in our day Spark shop. And they ensure that we only solve valuable problems where there's a defined benefit. It makes sure we only implement AI where it's an appropriate solution. And thirdly, we're identifying any significant challenges and risks early to maximize the likelihood of success. So, as I say, we start by identifying a high value problem to solve. Now, it may sound obvious, but as with any new technology, any technology trend, just because it's exciting and new doesn't necessarily mean it's the best tool for the job. There may be a simpler or cheaper way to solve your problem, or maybe the thing you're solving may not be a problem at all. We also see a lot of people starting with data and not the problem. So there's kind of attitude of, we have all this data, what should we do with it? Or we're still invested significant time and money creating a data warehouse and are now stuck trying to get any real business value from it. By starting with a problem, you can identify up front the data you need to solve that problem, which means you only ingest and process the data you're going to use. That inevitably ends up being much faster and cheaper than starting with the data than figuring out what you need. So we start the identify step with a simple process mapping exercise. As well as helping set the context, the process map becomes your scope boundary. We're only going to try and solve problems which exist in this map. The map also helps with articulating the benefits of any solution in terms the business understands. You can directly reference processes or workflows that are familiar. So what are we looking for in a process map? Well, businesses are complex and fractal-like, and you can always uncover more depth and more analysis. This phase is meant to be quick, so don't try and boil the ocean. Focus in on an area of the business where you feel there are valuable problems to solve. You may already have these maps in your business. If not, creating one with the granularity we need here typically involves 3 to 5 people in front of a whiteboard for a morning. It's important that you have people who are as close as possible to the process. Otherwise, you'll find yourself needing to schedule follow-ups to fill in the gaps. So don't worry at this stage about what works well and what doesn't. We'll get to that later. For now, it's just about what happens. One other thing to think about, there should only be one version of this process map. So if there are different opinions about how something operates, then you probably need to dig deeper to get to the truth. So get more people involved if necessary. It's really important to get absolute clarity on how things work today before you try and fix or improve them. Throughout this webinar, I'm going to be referencing probing questions. We use these at various steps in the process to help trigger ideas, keep people focused on what matters. All of these and more are available on our cheat sheets, which will be available for you to download at the end of the webinar. These probing questions. So there'll be a bunch of these as we go through, and you'll be able to download them all at the end. For mapping the process, these questions will help you get that right level of detail. You're looking to understand the discrete steps or processes in your value chain, the inputs to and the outputs from each step, and the value that's added by each step. Probably help to demonstrate that with an example. This is a typical process for finance team in a large organization. So they might have lots of outstanding invoices, some are overdue, and they will want to follow up on those that are overdue. So the inputs to this process are maybe an invoice description, some customer contact details, the amount. The process then involves a team working through a list of outstanding invoices, picking customers who are most overdue, or maybe the ones who owe the most, and then calling them to chase for payments. The output here is a conversation with the customer, which may result in payment or an extension being given to that payment. So this is really about as much detail as you need at this stage. As I mentioned before, processes can be like fractals. There's always more detail to uncover. And once you start digging into an area of interest, it might be necessary to revisit this map to do a more detailed analysis. Just so you know, a question about availability of deck. Yes, the deck will be available. So the key points in this will be available in our downloads later. We'll also make the deck available later. So once you have your process map, it's time to find the pain points. So what are the problems that need solving? What's where are you going to bring this value? So often you'll have started the process with a pain point in mind, a personal bugbear, or maybe a problem everyone's familiar with. Regardless of whether you have that pain point in mind or you're starting from a blank slate, it's worth looking again at each step in your process to identify where things might be less than optimal. So here are the probing questions we use to help with this part. What takes too long? So is there like a bottleneck that consistently delays something else in your process? Where's quality too low? So are you spending time or money fixing things that are constantly below par? What takes too many people? And if it's hard to judge what too many is, then simply asking where do we have a lot of people doing a task can be useful. This is especially relevant if it's a low value or low skilled task. Now, the chances are you're going to have a good idea of where things are going wrong, but these questions might help you identify other parts of the value chain that aren't optimized. One final point it's worth thinking about when identifying pain points. What's the output or metric that indicates this is a pain point? So if there's no data telling you it's a problem, how are you going to know when it's fixed? Once you've identified these pain points, it's worth describing them in a way that conveys the key details. It's like your elevator pitch for a pain point. I've got on this slide a couple of examples, kind of a good one on the left and a less good one on the right. So we look at the one on the left. This is from our accounts receivable example earlier. So what it says, timesheets tell us that the team spend 40% of their time chasing customers, but 80% of calls don't result in payment, meaning significant time is wasted and there's no value in that time. So why is this a good description? Well, we know what the problem is and how we know it's a problem. So this means we'll be able to know when we fixed it or improved it. We also know the actors, so who the problem relates to and how they're impacted. And that detail will really help when we come to evaluate solutions, as we'll be able to much better understand how the solution will impact the users. It's very easy to fall in the trap when finding pain points to assume some of these things are obvious, and they may be to you in the moment, but further down the line or to other people, the details won't be so clear. So it's worth getting all this down while you have them in your fresh in mind. It's also tempting to jump to a solution like in this other example on the right. So we need to automate payment chasing. So that may be the case, but we don't know if that's the best solution at this stage. We also don't know from this ticket why it needs to be better. So how will we know when we fixed it? As I said, so writing out pain points like the one on the left really helps make sure you thought through the problem. And it also provides a succinct synopsis of the problem that can be used throughout your planning and development. So when you're writing user stories, for example, and that helps to ensure that the thing you end up building really does solve the problem at hand. Okay, so now you understand how things work today and what could be better. The final part of identifying a high value problem relates to that phrase, high value. You need to quantify the value of the problems you've identified. This can be really hard, but is arguably the most important part of this phase. So AI isn't an end in itself. It's only valuable when it's solving a valuable problem. We've got some questions here to help you too. What's the impact on profit of a perfect solution? That was pretty self-explanatory. What's the cost of doing nothing? So how much are you spending on fixing those problems caused elsewhere in your process? Is there a benefit to an incremental solution? And if so, what's the benefit? So this is really valuable. If you can quantify incremental value, for example, if we fix this small part of the problem, it would save X amount. That will really help with your delivery prioritization. You're no longer kind of looking at massive projects. You can kind of start to chip off small bits that add incremental value. If the value you're creating or releasing isn't directly financial, this is relatively easy. So it is directly financial, it's relatively easy. If it's a less tangible value, like reputational value, competitive advantage, or organization health, then this exercise might take more time. Ultimately, though, you do need to tie the value back to money, because if you're going to invest in fixing the problem, at some point you're going to need to answer that question: how much are we willing to pay to have it fixed? So that's the identify phase. It will get you to the point of knowing the problems worth solving, the benefit there is to be gained by solving them, and where they sit in your value chain, and so which systems or people or teams are likely to be impacted by any change. When we do this in our Spark shop, all these steps and pain points are plotted on a physical or virtual board. And by the end of this phase, we have something that looks a bit like this. You have your process map in yellow, your pain points in pink, so these are associated with steps in the process. And then at the bottom, we've been able to rank the pain points according to their value. We've made a cheat sheet that will help you through this phase as well. I'll give you the link later, and that covers all the probing questions and gives you some pointers for how to define the pain points, so what information to capture. Okay, so step 2, qualifying. This is all about where we decide whether AI is the right solution to the problem we've identified. It's probably worth a bit of a introduction as to what we mean by AI at this stage. So when we tend to think of AI, we kind of think of that Hollywood version of AI of robots wandering around the kitchen, doing all your housework. And in the 50s, that's kind of what the future looked like. And we ended up just getting washing machines. They're not generally intelligent, but they're intelligent enough to do a specific job for us. And actually, if you tried to get them to do a different job, like washing dishes, then they'd fail catastrophically. And AI today is much like that. It's kind of they tend to be solutions designed to fulfill a specific purpose and for rather than kind of generally intelligent things. At Datasparq, we like to think of AI as augmenting human intelligence. So we see AI as kind of plugging the gaps where humans can't fill our jobs. So, for example, it allows businesses to act as if they had 1,000 more employees or thousands more hours in every day. So thinking about AI like that, it's great. You know, it never tires. It can make selfless, rational decisions. It can process information in quantities and speeds that humans will never achieve. And then say it's, as I say, it's very easy, especially with all the hype around it, to kind of jump to the conclusion that it's the right solution for your problem. But it's not all rosy, and it should rarely be seen as it should rarely be the only solution you look at to solve a problem. It can be expensive to implement well. For example, getting machine learning models running reliably in production is technically challenging and costly in compute resource. AI is not particularly creative. You know, they're good at thinking inside the box you give them, and that can be a real advantage, but it can also prove a limitation. Another big problem is it can make costly mistakes that humans avoid. AIs don't have common sense. I'm sure you've all read about sat navs directing people up footpaths or onto beaches. These are, from a human's point of view, these are kind of simple mistakes that we wouldn't make because of that kind of background common sense. But AIs can't be relied on not to make those silly mistakes. So how do you know if your problem is something that could and should be solved with AI? Well, it's first worth just noting down what your ideal solution would do. So each of those pain points you've identified will have a solution definition. We put these on these blue post-its, and that outlines some basic points around the solution, like who would use it, when and where they'd use it, how it would help them. Like the pain points, we've got some tips on how to best describe those. So this is kind of around what the solution would do and not how it would achieve it. So the example on the left is a good example here. It's saying this is back related to our payments chasing problem I talked about earlier. A solution would give a prioritized list of clients for the team to chase based on their likelihood to pay and the invoice amount. So it tells us what it is, how it would be used, why it would be beneficial. The description on the right, an AI-based CRM system built on Google Cloud Platform, you know, that may end up being the right solution, but it's too prescriptive at this stage, and it loses key information about what the purpose of your solution is. So you need to understand if the problem you've found and the solution you need are a good fit for AI. We've developed and collected from other sources a load of probing questions to help here. There are more of these in the cheat sheet for this phase, but I've picked out a few to talk through now. This isn't an exact science. It's not like, you know, if you get 80% on this, it's an AI problem. But if you find yourself answering yes to any of these questions, then it's definitely worth considering AI as a solution. First one, can your problem be solved with 1,000 teenagers? So AI can be really good at simple repetitive work. A typical example is in RPA, robotic process automation. So this is a system or, you know, a product that would read physical forms, for example, and maybe transcribe them into a computer system. So it's about kind of automating a pretty manual and low skilled part of your process. Could your problem be solved by predicting the future? So let's take demand forecasting, for example. When businesses want to plan pricing or staffing ahead of time, it would be ideal if they knew the future. If they knew the future demand for their products or services, they could totally optimize it. Now, it's next to impossible to do with this with traditional methods because there are so many, I mean, like traditional software development methods, because there are so many factors that affect demand in ways that are too complex to predict, and they interact with each other. And, you know, to code all that into a set of rules would be really challenging, if not impossible. But a machine learning model can actually figure out what those rules are by analyzing historical data and looking at the trends. So you don't need to code them. Now, do you need to explain behavior or patterns whose cause isn't immediately obvious? Good example here is churn reduction. Let's say you know that 10% of your customer base are churning, but you don't know why. Now, by giving an AI all the data you have about your customers and their behaviors and their use of your product or service, the model will be able to tell you which features are the most significant in affecting churn. And it may turn out to be something that was unexpected. We did some work for a gym chain recently, and the machine found a pattern of churn which related to the times people came to the gym. And when those times were correlated with times the change rooms were cleaned, it turned out that people who tended to come when the change rooms were dirtier were more likely to churn. So these kind of things that you wouldn't necessarily expect to find if you give a model, give it the data, it can turn out some surprising results. Also worth considering at this stage is, could you absorb the impact of an incorrect result? So as I mentioned earlier, AI doesn't have common sense. It's going to occasionally make mistakes that humans generally wouldn't. And it won't always be possible to predict what those mistakes would be and put in place rules to stop them. I'm sure you're familiar with the big backlash there is now against face detection by law enforcement because of exactly this. So it's not correct all the time. It sometimes mismatches faces, thinks they're the wrong people. And those instances where it's not correct, it can have a really profound impact on someone's life. So the impact of the failure is actually really, really high, and that's causing the big tech companies to actually pull out of this technology. Okay, so that's qualifying AI, deciding whether or not AI is the right solution. Again, there's a cheat sheet here. We'll give you that later. So a load more questions, a lot from Google. They've got some great stuff on this to help you decide if AI is the right solution, and some tips for how you can define those solutions succinctly up front. Right, third one. So we have a problem we're solving and a solution in mind that would best be solved with AI. Great, let's go and build it. Wait, before you hire a team, before you draw a project plan or go to looking for your delivery partner, it's worth doing a little more due diligence. Our validate phase here is all about de-risking. If your AI solution is going to fail, you want it to fail fast, ideally before you've written a line of code. And that way you've still got the time and money to get on and pursue a better solution. So the more assumptions you can prove and issues you can identify up front, the better. We have what we call a product primer canvas, which we'll give you later as well, that covers everything you need to look at here. I'm going to just focus on 3 areas within the product primer: data, users, and technology. So first, data. This one is especially relevant for machine learning solutions. So machine learning models need data from which to learn the rules. They learn rules from the data, and then they can make predictions on new data. We'll just look at these questions here. So what data is needed, how easy will it be to access, and what's easiest to get hold of most quickly. So the data is likely to come from many parts of your organization and maybe third parties as well. And even getting an initial data snapshot from your internal sources might require cooperation between business, tech, and data owners that your organization isn't used to. And many machine learning pilots fail at this first step. If it's going to be a challenge in your organization to get those teams working together, it's worth flagging it early. This is when your value quantification piece becomes really important. You're going to need an engaged leadership team who can ensure that various departments work together on the initiative, and being able to tie what you're doing back to the value it can bring to the business could be key to getting that collaboration. Also, at this stage, on that last point, think about how you could release incremental capability. If some of the data you want is going to take time to get hold of or to clean, what can you achieve now with the data that you have got? Next, users. So AI and machine learning, that they're technologies, but they're not just technology solutions. They're not just components in your stack that will kind of be invisible to the business. An effective AI solution is going to change how you work, but only if the people in your business use it. And that interface between your model or your AI and the user is really more important than any of the technology itself or the model itself. Like if the interface isn't appropriate, it doesn't matter how good the model is, it won't be used. And as with any new product, then it's really important to talk to your users early on, involve them in the design of the solution. If it's a demand forecasting model, for example, how are they going to use that output? How are they going to consume it? Do they want a daily Excel file? Do they want an integration through their purchasing system? Or do they just want like a dashboard on a TV in their office? Also, if your AI product is really adding value, then the chances are it's going to impact your wider business processes. And that impact can be significant, especially if it affects the way departments work with each other, or even more so if it affects employees' job descriptions. So if there are difficult conversations you need to have, it's worth having them early too. You don't want to be weeks or months into a project before it gets vetoed by a department or individual who doesn't support the business change needed to make it a success. Last one of these for now, technology. So building an effective machine learning model is already pretty hard on its own, but it's achievable with some good data science expertise. But if your model is supporting business critical decisions like what products you manufacture or how you price a hotel room, then it needs to be really robust. And this is where it gets a lot more challenging, as your priorities are quite different from the priorities when building models in isolation. So yes, it still needs to be accurate, but just as important, the model needs to run fast or fast enough for your user experience. It needs to fail gracefully. It needs to be cost effective. It's very easy to run up significant cloud bills when running machine learning models every day. So given all this, it's really important to consider some of these questions before you get started. Excuse me. So yeah, do you have the expertise in-house, or are you going to be outsourcing this? And if outsourcing it, do you want it to be developed on your own infrastructure or your cloud platform, or would you be willing to subscribe to it as a software as a service? And how might that decision affect your internal tech architecture and teams? If you're hosting it yourself, how will it be hosted? If it's going to be in the cloud, then it's really worth thinking hard about your running costs, even running a pilot to kind of predict what those future costs might be. Unexpectedly high cloud costs are another thing that can cause projects to be canned late on. As I say, you want to fail fast if you're going to fail. So uncovering any of these unknowns early is really important. We've got much more of that on the product primer, which I'll just show you briefly now. So as I say, this all these questions are available on this, and we'll send links after the webinar. We've also included a blank one that you can fill out for your project. The three-step process we talked about today and the structure of our Spark shop is all designed to get answers to this, really. And a completed product primer, it puts you in a great position to kick off your AI project. You'll be able to articulate the what, why, and how of your solution to your business. It will help you secure funding or get the project scheduled or start to build the right team for the job. And we cover, so in here we cover those elements I talked about, the data, the user experience, the technology, and also some of the things in the identify and qualify area around, you know, what's the key problem you're solving and what's the value at stake. Okay, right, I'm going to stop talking now and have a little drink of water and hand over to Darren, who's going to introduce our guest, Andy, from The Big Word.
Fantastic, thanks, Ollie. So as Ollie mentioned, and obviously Andy said hello at the beginning, we're pleased to be joined by Andy Carr from The Big Word today, who has been through this process with us and is going to be giving us his thoughts and answer any of the questions that you guys may have. I've seen another couple of questions come up, so we'll answer them after this. But Andy, if you want to introduce yourself and The Big Word and let everyone know a little bit about what you guys do and where you are at the moment.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Darren. So yeah, as the guys mentioned, I'm Andy Carr. I'm Head of Technology and Innovation at The Big Word. So The Big Word, been around for 40 years now, providing translation, interpretation, localization, and language technologies to various businesses all over the world. Today we're supporting large public sector organizations, a lot of the blue light services, plus a lot of very high profile private businesses as well. And essentially it's our responsibility, it's our sort of job to help our clients overcome their sort of challenges with language barriers and the cultural differences that they face on a daily basis. So to achieve this, we have a network of over 14,000 security cleared and approved linguists that are distributed globally, that collectively cover and speak over 250 languages. Personally, I've been working in the tech space now for over 15 years, predominantly operating within sort of architecture and sort of team management and product delivery. I've been with the Big Word now for just over a year. Prior to that, I have had an ongoing relationship, but actually within this current role, a year. During that year, we've been on quite a journey. We've spent a year significantly invested into our technology and our roadmaps moving forward. We've gone through a significant period of transition where we've taken all of our products and technology, moved it from traditional physical data centers out into cloud. We've gone through a process where we're re-architecting all our applications to leverage microservice component sort of based architectures. And through this process, we've developed a partnership with Microsoft, and through that partnership, we were kind of introduced to Datasparq, purely because we had a desire to drive process improvement and efficiencies through the adoption of AI and machine learning. And Microsoft kind of thought that there was mutual benefit in us kind of talking. And as Darren mentioned, we've been through this process a couple of months ago prior to the current pandemic. We hosted the Datasparq guys at our office in Leeds, and went through everything that Ollie's been kind of discussing and sharing with you guys today.
Fantastic. And obviously that's giving us a really good insight as to sort of where you guys were at in regards to the business and looking forward and how to adapt the organization. But specifically looking at things like AI and machine learning, what was you guys doing at the Big Word before? Oh, apologies for the sirens outside. What was you doing before we actually sort of entered the scene and produced this workshop? Because I know there was a number of different ideas that were floating around, but it'd be good to get an insight as to what you guys were doing and where your thought process was before engaging with us.
Yeah. So we'd started looking at various AI opportunities, covering predominantly two aspects of our business. So we were looking at ways in which we could leverage AI to drive more efficient translation processes and leverage more opportunities for neural machine translation. Plus, we were also looking at AI to help support our sort of broader sort of business requirement to provide the appropriate sort of supplier, the linguists themselves, associate them with the client requests that were coming through. Previously, there's kind of been various ways that we've kind of looked at to kind of improving this process, and we think we've got as far as we can do with sort of current technologies, but we were looking to kind of take that significant step further where we could kind of gain that sort of advantage and significant improvement over where we are today. We'd started looking ourselves at solutions that we were kind of proposing would be developed internally, looking at sort of the Azure services, being able to leverage those and create our own models and stuff. But I think the introduction of Datasparq at the time kind of was a positive in the sense that it kind of, prior to us actually committing any investment into development of those models and that approach, I think it was a timely interception because it got us to kind of challenge some of those sort of early thinkings and the road that we was going to go down.
Fantastic. And in regards to the actual sort of process, so as you sort of mentioned, you hosted us in your offices. We were there with you from, I think, sort of 10 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, going through all of this. How did you find the overall process from us, and how has it now made you think differently afterwards?
Mm-hmm. I was pleasantly surprised. I've done a few of these sort of workshops before, primarily around sort of product development, not specifically AI, and always found them sort of quite tricky and difficult, and really sort of questioned the value that kind of comes out of these sort of workshops. But I was kind of really surprised with kind of the way the day went and how it specifically catered for sort of the wider stakeholders within the business. Prior to the actual workshop, a couple of the guys that we'd actually invited in from the operations team, they had particular concerns as to whether they would have the necessary sort of background knowledge to be able to understand AI, whether they had the appropriate sort of technical skills to be able to even follow the conversation. But I think what the Spark Shop did was kind of cut through all that, leave technology aside and focus primarily on the process, how we operate today, looking at the two problem domains around sort of the translation, workflow, and the sort of supplier fulfillment, looking at those two areas under the context of how those processes work today, where are the current sort of pain points and challenges, and kind of working closely, not just with us from a technical point of view as to how our systems work today, but also from an operational point of view as to how they're kind of managing those processes with the solutions that are being provided to them, but also any sort of processes and sort of actions that they're having to do outside of the systems as well. And I think it was really good how those guys were fully included. And I think it was sort of beneficial, not just to the workshop, but to us within technology, just having our eyes open to the sort of challenges that they were kind of working with as well.
I think just jumping in there, and I think that's a really interesting point and good one that, again, we see missed often when we start engaging with companies. They'll, we'll set up a meeting and it'll be, we'll be meeting with 3 technology people and no one from the business, no one from operations. And, although yes, an AI solution will end up being hosted somewhere and it's, it is a technology thing, it's so important to involve those business people early on, understand how the what their problems are, how the solution will help them. Without that, you can, you're not setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, from a technology point of view, you can only kind of address the issues that you know about. So having those sort of discussions and that broader involvement will definitely lead to having a much more sort of inclusive solution in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. So finally, from me, Andy, I'm keen to sort of understand the sort of top 3 things that you guys took away from the workshop that's really helped you work out your next steps and what's next on the big word sort of transformation, effectively.
Okay. So probably the biggest thing that I took away, and I think having spoken to a few people afterwards as well, they were kind of lulled into the same sort of thinking that I was. So in working within software development, we're kind of used to delivering things in a very sort of iterative process, creating new features, delivering them fast, and going through that process of continuous improvement. But actually, when we start sort of considering technologies like AI, you kind of unconsciously lulled into thinking, like Ollie mentioned earlier about the 1980s, of these sort of grand solutions that are extremely complex. And I think what the workshop did for me particularly was just open my eyes and just say, kind of, we don't need to create one monolithic model that's kind of overly complicated, actually, and that's going to take several years to actually deliver. Instead, we can take an approach of being much more scaled back, looking at the key areas that are going to deliver the most value in the quickest time, deliver solutions around those areas that will give us as a business the opportunity to recoup those sort of returns and that kind of recover any sort of costs, to then reinvest further into the product and kind of keep building it incrementally. I think prior to the workshop, our sort of aspirations were potentially far too grand, that had we gone down that process, we could have been several months in and not realised any of the potentials and potentially spent a lot of money. So for me, that was kind of number one takeaway. I think the other area was kind of through the exploration of kind of going through the processes and kind of the tools and techniques that you guys kind of deploy as part of the workshop, is just to kind of consider other areas for AI, but also exclude AI from what you might necessarily consider as an early candidate. I think a lot of the areas that we initially sort of considered as AI were a little bit more sort of just standard business logic, and areas where we kind of maybe just glossed over were actually more sort of significant and would have benefited greatly from AI. So that's the second one. And then the third, it's that it isn't just a technology solution. As we've said kind of numerous times now, for AI to succeed, it can only, and the technology to succeed, it can only be as good as the inputs and the requirements that are driving it. And for that to be as good as it can be, it does require the involvement of not just technology, but also the wider involvement of the business and stakeholders as well. So for me, they're the three sort of key takeaways that I took from the session. As regards our sort of aspirations and where we're going now, obviously COVID happened, so sort of project sort of and priorities change. We're currently in the process of still looking at AI as a solution. We're looking at kind of introducing it within sort of areas of our translation process. Probably not be doing it as fast as we might have liked, but it's still something that we're going to be kind of pushing forward with and pursuing. And we'll be taking much more of an incremental approach. So we'll be delivering AI components quickly, measuring the benefit, recovering the value, and then reinvesting until we've kind of built out rather than one monolithic model, a whole suite of smaller models that tackle very specific business challenges and deliver higher quality results.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Andy, for that. That's been really helpful and useful, and I'm sure there's going to be a few questions. So we do have some time now, and I know that we've got a couple of questions. So I will just read one of those out for Ollie. What are the challenges regarding machine learning models pointing to data sets behind applications which constantly evolve process-wise through continuous integration?
Okay, so there's going to be lots of challenges there. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we involve a data engineer really early on in our projects. So we don't, our machine learning projects, they will have a data scientist involved, obviously, but a data engineer is important because, you know, a data scientist will likely be happy developing a model in a clean environment with a static data set. But in real life, we know things are much messier. So yeah, if you're integrating with something that's changing because maybe the system you're integrating with is using CI/CD, and every day, maybe or multiple times a day, that data set is changing. I mean, our data engineers will typically figure out how the model is going to interact with batch or streaming data sets and build whatever the appropriate integrations are. So I think if we use Dataflow, which is an Apache Beam thing, to build our integrations, that works for both our batch and stream, so we don't have to build things twice. I think it's really important that your model can fail gracefully. So what I mean by that is if work out what the core elements are of the data to get the results you need. If there's more data there, then maybe the results will be better. If there's less data there, then you need to design your system such that it still works. It just maybe the results aren't so good, rather than failing. I think it's another area where the challenge may not be so much in the technology as in the communication between departments. You know, if you are using data from an app or a service held or owned by a different part of your organization, if that data is critical to your solution, then you need the contracts in place to ensure that the data isn't changing multiple times a day. And you know, even if that contract's just around the minimum data set you need, and so you can kind of agree that there will always be at least these fields, or the data will always be to at least this quality or at least this complete, just so you've got what you need, the minimum you need to produce the results, then at least you know it's not going to fail. But it's a challenge. That's a difficult one, and why I say get the engineers involved early.
Yeah, and obviously we can put one of our sort of tech engineers on a call or an email chain with whoever asked that question. If there's any more that you'd like to know around that sort of specifically. Another question here. So what sort of product interfaces are common? So if it's not a robot or a washing machine, what do people in the business actually interact with?
Okay, so I mean, I'm not sure what's kind of most common. I know we've seen a whole range, so I can just kind of talk through some of the things we've done. APIs are one that is common. You know, that often or usually companies who approach us will already have systems and tools in place, and just because they're investing in an AI solution doesn't necessarily mean they want to rip out all their tech and replace it. So we'll often build APIs that will hook into existing systems to bring a data point into a field or on a form or whatever it is. The other one that's pretty common is just dashboards, like business intelligence dashboards. So, you know, they're, rather than just kind of outputting key data points as dashboards typically do, you know, how many products have I sold today, outputting the results of the machine learning model into that as well. So you can also see in the same dashboard, you know, how many you might be predicted to sell next week, or who's going to churn this week, or why. So what's that's kind of, integrating into existing apps, then dashboards. I guess the other, you know, if we are going to build new for someone, then actually just building an interactive application from scratch. So actually that's when it can be at its most optimal, really, if you can kind of bake in the prediction and the AI from the start. So you're actually building a user interface that's aware that all those things are there. And you can kind of, you best design it to use the AI rather than it being a bolt-on. I mean, I think then as well as that, there's pretty kind of low-key integrations as well. I mentioned Excel earlier. That wasn't a joke. Like, we will get clients who, you know, their process involves someone looking at an Excel file. And again, part of getting AI to succeed is making sure it's used. And if already you've got the processes and the teams, and that's how they use data, then the best output could just be a CSV. So yeah, varied, and it will. I mean, we look at each problem in turn and see what's best for the users.
Okay, cool. And one more here. So we've discussed a lot about process mapping. So who should do the process mapping in the business? Is it done by the data scientists and data engineers? What's the optimal team, I suppose, to sort of go through this process?
So it shouldn't just be done by the data engineers and data scientists. I mean, as a product owner, I tend to lead that role here, but you really want to involve people from around the business. The key to that, you know, the key isn't getting kind of an approximation from one person. You really need to understand how things work, and that requires getting the people who, for example, use the tools or built the systems. We've had a couple of examples where we've worked with companies, and we've got to that point where there's disagreement over how the process works, and it's really interesting when you kind of you realize that actually that it's not simple. People think it's simple just to explain how our business works, but often, even when you have the people who understand it, there are differences in opinion, and it's really worth knowing if that's the case early on, because you really can't solve a problem if you don't know what the problem is or how things work today. So it's it needs to be coordinated by a project manager, a product manager, but you need to involve enough people so that you really do understand what's going on. So operations, business, tech.
Just quickly from my sort of perspective, I think the blend that we had available at the workshop sort of worked well. And in that, obviously, we had representatives from technology, we had product owners, business analysts, we had a change manager that's responsible for business process improvement, and also representatives from sort of operational side of things that are actually hands-on using the systems. And I think we were quite lucky in the sense that we had consensus between all of those parties as what the sort of process was. But it was quite interesting as well to have all those sort of different viewpoints to find out, particularly at different stages, why the process is as it is. But I think that blend that we made available for the session worked really well.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for that, Andy. That's really useful. And again, thanks, Ollie, for answering those questions. Looks like we've sort of run out of time now, so I'll hand it back over to Ollie.
Brilliant. Thank you. Before you all go, one more quick poll. Just be keen to know, you'll see this pop up now, just how useful you found this and which area, which section was most relevant and useful to your situation. So I'll just give you a few seconds to answer that. Okay, thank you all very much. You can read more about what we're up to on our Medium channel. We talk about this process and product thinking in how we deliver AI, as well as we've got a tech blog up there, so you can read about some of our technology. And the assets I talked about will be available at datasparq.ai/downloads. You will send these links in an email following the webinar, so don't worry if you don't catch them now. But thank you very much. If this sounds really interesting, relevant, you fancy going through this process but would like someone else to manage it and sort it out, then do get in touch with Darren or me about a Spark shop, and we can look at setting one of those up for you. But that's all for me today. Thanks for joining, and hope to speak to you soon.